William Harper. I'm 59 years old. I'm a Navy veteran, and I've spent a good part of my life repairing engines and trying to repair people as well, especially my son. Now tell me sincerely, what would you do if the person you loved most in the world looked you in the eye and said, "Go meet the grizzly bear"? Sounds absurd, doesn't it? Well, this phrase came out of my own son's mouth, in the middle of an Alaskan forest, where he left me for dead. If you've ever had a son or daughter, you know how love for them can be greater than anything. We give, 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 and he hopes deep down that this will one day come back in the form of respect. But what about when what comes back is ingratitude? When is what comes coldness? When the blood of your blood leaves you like you're a burden? Today I'm going to tell you the story of how I ended up alone in the middle of the forest, betrayed by the one I protected the most, and how I turned that betrayal into a silent lesson he will never forget, because some children only learn when the father stops saving. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. No one wakes up expecting to be betrayed by those they put into the world. I didn't imagine that after everything I've done, I'd end up alone in the middle of a frozen forest, listening to my son say, "Meet the grizzly bear," as he disappeared with the truck, supplies, and even my rifle. He left me there, like someone who leaves an old piece of furniture on the sidewalk. 30 kilometers of snow, dense bush, bear and wolf everywhere. But what Mason didn't know is that I would survive. And when he returned, thinking that he was already the only living heir, I was the one who opened the door. Now, if you're here so far, if you felt that tightness in your chest, it's because somehow this story hit somewhere inside you. Maybe because you've also given everything for someone. Perhaps because he knows the bitter taste of a silent ingratitude. So if you can, leave your like, subscribe. Not for me, but for all the fathers and mothers who have already been forgotten after a lifetime of surrender. This support, as small as it may seem, is like a silent embrace. And today, I need one. I met Sarah at a thrift fair on a drizzle Saturday in Tacoma. She was wearing a Seattle Mariners jersey and trying to negotiate a rusty carburetor that didn't even fit anymore. I didn't have the courage to talk to a beautiful woman, but that day, something pushed me. We got married less than a year later. Sarah was the heart of the house, you know, the kind that laughed with his eyes. And when Mason was born, she said that he had come to teach us the roughest and most beautiful love. And he did. For a while, Sarah fell ill early. Bone cancer. The disease took the sparkle in her eyes, but it didn't take the strength. I remember her sitting in the armchair in the living room, with the colorful scarf tied around her head, reading to Mason as if she had no pain at all. I worked odd jobs in 2 workshops to cover expenses, and in the early hours I still filled out spreadsheets trying to keep our business afloat. I had to sell tools, sell the car, but I didn't sell the promise I made on her deathbed. "Will, take good care of our boy, and don't let it harden for the world." I said I would take care of it. I said that looking into her eyes. After she left, I was never the same. I didn't want another woman. I didn't want another life. I just wanted to make sure Mason had what I didn't have. Tranquility, a clean room, hot food, good school, pocket money, and someone always ready to solve problems before they turn into tragedy. And for a long time, I thought that was being a good father. I put Mason in private school, $38,000 a year. I used to take the bus to the workshop so that he would have a new sneaker every semester. At 16, I gave away a Honda Civic with 0. At 18, he entered the University of Washington with everything paid for, including the dorm room and fraternity extras. He had a vacation in Florida, an exchange program in Spain, a weekend in New York, just because he said he needed to unwind. And every time something went wrong, it was my phone that rang. Fights with roommates, blown cards, low grades, existential crises. I would drop everything to solve it. I thought that was beautiful. I thought I was careful, but it wasn't. Over time, the boy who asked me to push on the swing became the man who only called me to ask for money. And each request came with a veiled demand. "You always said you would take care of me, didn't you?" It was as if my debt to him never ended, as if he were the eternal orphan of a mother he didn't even remember well. And I kept paying for everything, including my fault. Guilt for not saving Sarah. Guilt for not having cried at the funeral as the others expected. Guilt for working so hard and missing birthdays. Guilt for being too strong on the outside and too weak on the inside when it came to him. There was one night in particular that I will never forget. Mason must have been about 23 years old. He showed up at my house, sweaty, saying that the rent was late. I gave the money. He didn't even ask how I was, he just took it and left. When I closed the door, I sat on the stairs and stayed there for about 40 minutes, in silence. I felt like a bank, not a father. A bank he visited when the balance was zero. And the worst? I let it. Tell me something. How many parents do you know who confuse presence with payment? Who exchange conversation for deposit? That they think they are loving, when in fact they are avoiding abandonment? I know that this pain is not only mine. And if you've also felt this, of giving everything and still feeling disposable, comment below. I've lived it. I'm going to read each one. Gradually, I noticed that Mason looked at me as someone who looks at a service. He smiled when the pics fell. He disappeared when everything was fine. The messages were getting shorter. The hugs, formal. The, I love you, became, thanks, Dad. And yet, I tried to start a conversation. He tried to find out about the plans. He spoke of values, responsibility, the future. And he listened as if waiting for the coffee to cool down. There was a day when I asked him if he wanted to take over one of the workshops. He laughed. He said that gear was not his future. He spoke as if I were a dinosaur and the life I built was a joke. But everything changed, or rather, everything collapsed. On a rainy afternoon in Seattle, he arrived wet, unannounced, and said, Dad, I need $5,000, today. The way he said, as if I were obligated, as if it were an obligation of the universe to pay for its whims. It was the first time I didn't deliver it right away. And it was also the first time I saw in his eyes no disappointment, but anger, pure, cold. He said something that still gives me goosebumps today. When you die, all this will be mine anyway. And then, he turned his back. It was in that sentence that I understood, that what I created, he was not the man his mother dreamed of. He was an adult who saw my end as the beginning of his life. And there, sitting in that room still smelling of grease and remembering Sarah, I felt something break, as if the link between us had cracked for good. But do you know what scared me the most? It was realizing that even after that, a part of me was still trying to believe that I could fix it, that could, with a little skill, with a little more love, change course. I was a mechanic after all. He was always trying to fix what others thought was a total loss. But a son's heart, there is no spare part. And it was precisely in this state, half lost between pain and hope, that he came up with an idea. A journey, a chance for reconnection. Let's go camping in Alaska, Dad. Just the two of us like in the old days. And that's where it all started. Or rather, that's when the end began to be set. Do you think I was? Do you think I accepted? Get ready because the answer will leave you breathless. I was sitting at the kitchen table reviewing some invoices from the workshop when I heard the front door slam. Strong. The whole house shook, and Sarah's picture almost fell off the shelf. Mason rushed in, his hood wet from the Seattle rain, his sneakers leaving dark marks on the wooden floor. I didn't even have time to get up. He already came with an altered voice saying that he needed $5,000. That was not a request, it was an order. Today, Dad. Even today. I looked at him calmly, tried to understand what was happening. $5,000 for what, son? And that's when he raised the tone. He said that the money I gave him per month barely covered his rent, that I had millions standing still while he lived tight. The way he spoke, as if I owed him a debt for existing. I tried to take a deep breath to maintain my posture. Mason, we've talked about it. You need to find a steady job. Create a base. He gave a dry laugh with venom in his throat. Work? For what? If after you die all this will be mine. Those words chilled my blood. I stared at him without being able to react for a few seconds. It was as if I had heard someone completely stranger using my son's face. And he continued walking around the room, annoyed, as if he owned the place. And maybe, in his mind, it really was. Because everything he saw there, the tools, the old trophies, Sarah's books, he already counted as an inheritance. You control everything like a dictator, he said. How long are you going to keep throwing this responsibility of a father in my face? That hurt, because if there's one thing I never wanted, it was throwing anything in his face. I just wanted him to grow up right, that he was a man of integrity, that he would take care of what I fought so hard to build. But at that moment, he didn't seem interested in any of that, only in how much it was worth. How soon would I die? How many zeros would he have in the account when it was all over? And I couldn't say anything. My throat locked. I spent 20 years trying to be the best father I could, trying to honor the promise I made to Sarah, but all that was left there was silence. Mason noticed. He looked at me, perhaps feeling that he had gone too far, but he did not apologize. He just turned and left, slamming the door even harder than when he entered. The house was muted. The only thing that moved was the picture of our family shaking on the fireplace furniture. Sarah smiled in the frame holding child Mason. I stared at that image for long minutes, and for the first time in years, I felt ashamed. Shame of having raised someone who thought it was normal to talk about the death of his own father, as if it were a transaction. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in Sarah's armchair until dawn, trying to understand where I went wrong. So many people say that to love is to give everything, but maybe to love is also to know when to stop giving, because if you give everything without demanding anything, the person learns to see you as a thing, not as a father. I was starting to understand that, and it was with this weight on his chest that 2 days later, Mason showed up with an invitation that sounded strange from the beginning. A reconnection trip, camp, Alaska, insulation, father and son in the middle of the snow. Can you imagine what went through my mind when he made this invitation? Can you guess what was the first thing my gut whispered to me? Because what I found out later, it made me doubt if that was just a coincidence, or if my son had already started digging my grave. We went weeks without exchanging a word. I didn't care. He didn't care either. The house was too quiet, and even with the noise of the workshop, it seemed that there was an emptiness swirling inside my chest. It was on a Thursday night, almost 9, that he appeared again, this time without anger, without charge. He arrived with a backpack on his back and a different smile on his face. "Dad, I've been thinking. We need to reconnect." That caught me off guard. I didn't even know if it was a joke, but he continued. "Remember when we camped? Me, you, and Mom? I was looking at some travel packages and I thought it was an amazing deal. Alaska, Denali National Park, everything is already paid. Full camp, 5 days, just the two of us." He spoke fast, as if he had rehearsed. He said that his friends had given up going and that the reserves would expire if we didn't use them. He even showed me the printed tickets, itinerary, equipment, everything. He said it was a gift, a new beginning. And I wanted to believe it. Not for him, but for me. Because as much as we try to be strong, every father still keeps a part that dreams of seeing his son go back to being that boy he was before. The one who looked at you with admiration, not interest. Accepted. I said yes. He hugged me, and for a second, I swear, I thought maybe there was hope. We left 3 days later. At the Seattle airport, Mason looked overexcited. He jumped from one foot to the other, made jokes, even commented that I would like the snow, that it was good to disconnect from the city for a few days. During the flight, he started a conversation about things from the past. He told of the first time we camped at Mount Rainier, when he was about 8 years old and got lost for a few minutes in the middle of the trees. He said that it had been the scariest day of his life. "I remember I hugged you and didn't want to let go for hours. Remember that, Dad?" "I remember, yes. I remember almost fainting from terror, running into the woods screaming his name. I remember the feeling when I met him. At that time, he was still my boy." When the plane made a connection in Anchorage, I noticed that Mason was spending too much time on his cell phone. I left to go to the bathroom and it took 20 minutes. When he returned, he gave short answers. "I was just checking the weather forecast," he said. I pretended to believe it, because silence sometimes hurts less than the truth. Then we rented a car, a Toyota 4Runner, with insurance and road chains. I checked the tires myself and checked the engine. Mechanic's instinct. We stopped by an equipment store. He bought more flashlights, emergency flare, a long rope, even a complete first aid kit. Precaution is never too much, right, Dad? I thought it was strange, of course. That amount of equipment didn't suit someone who never really liked camping. But I kept silent. I followed him along the icy road. The forest was beginning to take shape on both sides of the highway. Snow on the branches, signs warning about bears, deer, ice. It was like entering a forgotten world. "Isolated, right?" Mason commented. "Total peace." The way he said isolated made me uncomfortable. It sounded more like a plan than an appreciation. We stopped at a gas station to fill up, and while I filled the tank, he went to the shop. I watched from afar through the window as he took his cell phone out of his pocket and made a quick call, speaking softly. His posture has changed. Shrugged, hard look. When he returned, he disguised himself, said he was seeing if the weather was going to close down. But I already knew. He was lying. I just don't understand why yet. We continued our journey. The road was now dirt, and the GPS began to fail. The park was already nearby. From time to time, he would look at me and make comments that made me uneasy. Remember when you taught me how to identify animal footprints? You always said that the bush reveals the character of man. Or, this kind of place reveals who we really are, doesn't it? It seemed to be testing me. I responded with my head, trying to keep my attention in the direction, but inside my chest was heavy. We arrived at the Denali Lodge in the late afternoon. Simple, rustic cabin, animal names on the doors. We were greeted by a nice girl, but with attentive eyes. "Are you going to do the full trail?" he asked, looking at the reservation form. Rota do Sertão do Rio Tlanica. That scared me. It was the longest and most dangerous route in the park, according to the brochure. When I tried to suggest something lighter, Mason insisted. "Let's do it like the old days, Dad. Real savagery." "You've always liked that." I swallowed. Part of me wanted to believe that it was just enthusiasm. But the other part, the part that survived the combat, that had already looked at death closely, began to whisper, "You know that feeling that something is going to go wrong, and there's no going back? That's that." It had already begun to grow inside me. And the next day, when we met the forest guard, this feeling only increased. Because that's when the first real alerts began to emerge, and you will understand why. We woke up early the next day. The floor of the cabin still creaked icy, and the light outside was from a day that seemed beautiful but cold, the kind of cold that gets through the bones. Mason was already awake before me, packing his backpacks in a hurry for someone who said he wanted to enjoy the moment. We had a quick coffee and went straight to the park's visitor center. It was a simple building, made of light wood but well cared for. It had maps on the walls, safety alerts, and a television playing an educational video about the region's wildlife. And it was there that we met Park Ranger Jennifer Walsh. Tall, firm posture, calloused hands. She greeted us with a direct look as if measuring a man's soul at the first handshake. "Where are you going exactly?" she asked, pulling out a clipboard. Before I could answer, Mason spoke quickly. "Tlanica River Trail. We want a complete wild experience." She raised her eyebrows. "This trail takes you more than 30 miles from the nearest outpost. No cell signal, no other campers. High bear activity at this time. Do you have experience with advanced trails?" I took a deep breath and said that I had military training and that I had camped several times in the past. But Mason just nodded and muttered, "Yes, with friends. I've already made a few trips." Lie. I knew it was a lie. My son has never really camped since his mother died. And even when we did it, it was always under my care with the car nearby, easy trails, campsites with structure. The guard did not seem convinced. He showed the map. She pointed out the spots where 2 grizzly bear cubs had been sighted the week before, which she said meant that the mother must be nearby, and protective. He also warned about moose in aggressive behavior, and wolves in the lower areas. If something happens there, an air rescue can take up to 2 days. Do you understand that? I nodded respectfully. "Ja Mason," he just replied. "That's why we're taking flares, rifles, emergency kits. We are ready." We left the center with the warning echoing in my head. Something didn't add up. I saw Mason walk in front of me with a full backpack, his equipment shining so new. Even the boots had tags still attached to the laces. A man doesn't buy everything new like that all of a sudden, for a simple trip with his father. And why did he insist so much on that specific track? With so many safer options, why that one? And why so much hurry to get there? We drove for another 40 minutes, a road getting narrower and narrower. The pine trees began to close in on both sides like green and silent walls. Not a single living soul around. When we stopped on a curve to review the route, Mason got out of the car to stretch his legs, but I noticed him checking his cell phone again, hidden behind the truck. He pretended to look at the time, but I knew. He wasn't checking any forecast. I had already looked in the morning, clear skies for 3 days in a row. And even so, when I asked lightly, he replied, "Snow system can arrive. Better prevent." Lie upon lie. And the worst, It was to see how he said it looking into my eyes, as if I were blind, as if I were a weak old man who didn't deserve to know the truth. But do you know what stopped me from saying anything? Love. That silly love we have for the one we created. The dumb hope that perhaps he was just excited, exaggerating, trying to prove something to me. My heart screamed a warning, but my guilt kept me silent. It was as if I still owed something, as if I needed to move on with it to show him that I was still there, that I was still his father. I'm here opening my heart, telling my story like someone who opens a wound. If you're still with me so far, listening to all this, leave a like on this video and subscribe to the channel. I still have a lot of things in store to tell you, and sometimes, telling is the only way we have to follow. We arrived at a point on the road where it was no longer possible to drive by car. There began the trail of the Tlanica River. There was no one, just wooden plaques with names scratched by time. We unloaded our backpacks and started walking. And it was there, with the wind cutting through the skin and the silence of the forest weighing in the air, that I noticed the way he looked at me, as if observing, like someone who measures the distance to the edge of the cliff. I still didn't know, but the countdown had already begun. And the next day when I woke up and saw that the truck was gone, then yes, everything made sense. Do you think I freaked out? That I despaired? Because what I did, it was much worse. The night before was cold, but quiet. The fire was burning low and Mason kept vigil while I slept. I still believed that this was a sincere effort, an attempt to rebuild something. Before I closed my eyes, I remember whispering to myself, maybe there's still a way. But what awaited me at dawn was not reconciliation. It was a sentence. I woke up to the sound of zippers being closed, hurried footsteps, metal hitting against metal. I left the tent with my eyes still cloudy and the wind cutting through my skin. Mason was leaning against the truck, closing the lid of the bed. All our equipment was inside. Backpacks, flashlight, food, rifle, even the gallon of water. All I had left was the clothes on my back. He saw me and didn't disguise it. He looked me in the eye with a calmness that scared me more than any storm I had ever faced in my life. And he said, as if giving advice, "It's time for you to learn to survive on your own, Dad. Go meet the grizzly bear." I stood still, the body locked, the mind trying to understand if that was a bad joke. "Mason, stop it. What is it? What is this game?" He only gave a half smile. "It's no joke. It is a lesson. Maybe 30 miles of forest will make you understand what it's like to depend on others." And he got into the car. I still tried to run to him, but he had already started. The engine roared. The dust has risen. And I stayed. I stood there, watching the truck disappear among the trees, as if the road swallowed my last bond with the world. The forest fell silent. A different silence. Silence of sentence. Silence of abandonment. I looked around. Nothing. No marked trail. No plate. No sound of people. Just the rustling of leaves blowing in the wind and the rustling of something big, very big, moving in the distance. I sat on a rock. His hands trembled. But it wasn't because of the cold. It was for emptiness. Because there, at that very moment, the penny dropped. My son hated me enough to let me die. He didn't want an argument. I didn't want to prove a point. He wanted my end. Deliberate, cold, planned, and with each passing minute, it became more real, harder, more cruel. I took a deep breath. The air came in cutting, but it helped to lighten. I remembered what I learned in the Navy. Evaluate, adapt, act. But at that moment, all I could do was feel it, feeling how it hurts to realize that someone you raised with love became his tormentor. I could die there. He could slip on a rock, be attacked by a bear, freeze at night. But do you know what hurt more than the idea of death? It was knowing that he wouldn't care. That probably at that very moment he was already returning to the city, maybe even rehearsing a sad story in case someone asked about me. And it was there, sitting on that rock, with heavy breathing and torn soul, that I made a choice. I wasn't going to die. Not by him. Not in that place, not in that way. Because if he wanted me to become a statistic, so he didn't really know the man he created. The question now was, how to get out of there alive. How to overcome the cold, the animals, the distance, the hunger, and still look him in the eye afterwards. And what would I do when she met him again? I stood there for a few minutes, staring at nothing, trying to organize my head. The cold Alaskan wind cut through my skin like a knife, but I didn't even feel it. The pain inside was greater. The ground around me was white and hard, but what really weighed was the emptiness Mason left. And look, nor was it just abandonment. That was the intention, because it was not an accident nor an impulse. That was premeditated, thought, deliberate. That's it. It ignited me inside in a way I didn't even know was still possible. I could be old, I could be tired, but be discarded like that, like a nuisance, like a dead weight? No, I wasn't going to die there. I got up slowly. The knee complained, the back too, but the rest of the body, he went back, one by one, the senses aligned. It was as if my training past came back quietly without warning. Evaluate, adapt, act. I remembered it as a whisper from within. I had the sun on my back, so I knew his direction could guide me. I used dry branches to mark the point where I was. I ripped strips off my thermal t-shirt to tie to the bushes at every turn, and I started walking. Slowly, silent, observing everything. I soon realized that there were moose tracks ahead, and where there is moose, there is water. I followed carefully, stepping firmly, looking at the ground. The snow had claw marks, bears, deep tears in the trunk of a tree next door. That was marked territory, and I was an intruder, alone, without protection, without weapons. But even with the fear, something inside me screamed, "Don't stop." The first stream appeared after almost 2 hours. Cold, clean water. I knelt down, drank slowly. I wet my face. I took a deep breath. I remembered Sarah's face. And I swear, at that moment I felt like she was there, looking at me, telling me, "Get up, Will, you still have more to do." And I got up, because that's what it was. I still had more to do. Look, if you're listening to this until now, don't let go. Because, as much as all this sounds like movie history, what comes next? What I discovered in the following days. It's the part that changes everything. Stay with me. There will still be things that will give you goosebumps. I followed the hunting trail further west, guided by the sound of water and instinct. I found a thick branch that I could use as support, as if it were an improvised stick. And I went, marking the path with small piles of stone, crossed branches, any sign that would help me get back if I needed to. The army days taught me not to depend on luck. And in that forest, luck was the first to abandon you. In the late afternoon, I found a moss-covered elevation. I lay there for a while, feeling the weak heat that my body still held. I closed my eyes for a moment, but my mind wouldn't turn off. The image of Mason leaving, with that cold voice, with that absurd phrase, "Go meet the grizzly bear," swirled in my head like a curse. How does a child get to that point? How does someone turn their backs on their own father like that? But the more I thought, the more one certainty grew. I couldn't just survive. I had to go back, and I had to look him in the eye. Not to get revenge, but to show that he didn't bury me, that he failed, that the man he tried to erase was still standing. When night fell, I made shelter with branches and thick leaves. I improvised a kind of cover with tree bark, just enough to block the direct wind. I spent the night with my ears attentive, noises of branches breaking, a distant howl, heavy breathing of large animal passing by. But nothing touched me. Maybe it was luck. Maybe it was God. Maybe it was just respect for the forest for someone who wasn't there to die. By dawn on the second day, my body was exhausted, but it was still responding. My hands were cut, my feet sore. My belly was already starting to hurt with hunger, but I still had my senses. And he was angry. Good anger. The one that doesn't explode. The one who lifts you up. I decided to continue descending, looking for a road sign, or any human structure. And it was on this walk in the middle of the snow and dense forest that I came across something that made me stop. A recent footprint. In boots. It wasn't from an animal. It was made of people. But not just any people. I knew that sole pattern. It was the same as Mason's. And for the direction, he had returned to that side. The question was, why? What would he have forgotten there? Or, did he come back to make sure I wasn't alive anymore? I needed to find out. And what I found a few steps ahead changed the course of everything. The noise came like a metallic whisper in the middle of the forest, a sound that did not belong to that ancient silence of the trees and the biting wind. Stopped, breath bent, heart pounding. It was an engine. Small, constant. ATV, I was sure. And in that isolated place, any noise like that could be life or problem. I approached cautiously, the improvised stick firmly in my hands. I hid behind a stone elevation and peered through the branches. There they were, 3 men in hunting suits with large backpacks and guns on their backs. They laughed loudly, threw snow at each other, as if they knew the territory. My feet advanced without my command. It was the first time I had seen people since Mason left me for dead. When I appeared in the middle of the trail, one of them drew his rifle and pointed it. "Calm down," I shouted, raising my arms. "I'm a civilian. I need help." A second of tension, and then the eldest of them lowered his gun. White beard, hard but fair look. "Who are you?" he asked. "William Harper. I was left here. My son abandoned me." Those words were slurred, hard, hurt. The man introduced himself. Oliver, former forest ranger in the region. He was there with 2 nephews, hunting legally with special permission. He offered me water, food, and a makeshift fire. When I told him what Mason had done, his face changed. "You're lucky to be alive," he said. "This trail here does not appear on any map. Only those who have worked here for years know it." He looked at me for a while, evaluating. Then he added, "But you know, maybe it wasn't just luck." I nodded, because deep down I also knew that it wasn't. I explained that I didn't want to call the police yet, that I needed to think, that I wanted to see my son's eyes first. Oliver understood. He offered me a ride to the nearest civilian area, an old roadside motel used by hunters and park staff. He said it would take about 4 hours along that secret route. Accepted. I got on the quad bike with sore bones, but a firm spirit. The wind hit his face, cut his skin like a blade. But I felt no pain. He felt purpose. And as strange as it may seem, I also felt peace. Peace for not having died. Peace for having been tested and still being there. In silence, I thanked him. To the forest. To Sarah. To time. We arrived at the motel just before sunset. Simple, old place, but with a warm bed and strong coffee. They gave me a room at the back with a window that overlooked the road. Oliver stood nearby, suspicious of Mason's silence. He thought that perhaps my son had returned to the place to confirm my disappearance. I thought the same, and I wanted to be there when he arrived. I had something inside me that I needed to see his reaction, to see if there would be guilt, fear, anger, or just coldness, because sometimes we only understand the person when we see their face thinking they are safe. And I wanted to see that. I stood there for hours, sitting on the edge of the bed, looking out the window. The memory of everything I experienced there on the ice still swirled in my head. Hunger, abandonment, the feeling of being discarded. There is no greater pain than being treated like nothing by someone you treated like everything. And look, if you've ever been through something like this, not at this level perhaps, but if you've ever felt betrayed by someone in your own home, then comment below. He tells me, "I understand you. I've lived it. It's true." Because knowing that there are more people who have gone through this, it helps me not to feel so alone in this story. The next morning, I woke up to the noise I already knew. Toyota 4Runner engine. I looked out the window. It was him. Mason. Parking. Alone. Calm face. Hair tidy. He got out of the car as if returning from a simple fishing trip. He opened the trunk calmly. He took the backpacks. He even seemed relieved. He locked the car, took a deep breath, and he walked towards the reception. And that's when I got up. Calmly, I put on my coat. I opened the bedroom door, and I started walking down the hall. Because, my friend, what that boy didn't know is that the old man he tried to bury, it was much more alive than he imagined. And what would come next? It was going to change everything. I walked down the steps of the hallway slowly, feeling the floor creak under my snow-soaked boots. Every step I took was like a reminder that I was still there, alive, steadfast, standing. And not by miracle, but by choice. Mason didn't see me when he passed through the front desk. I asked the guy at the counter not to say that I had already arrived, and he nodded with a discreet nod. I went back to my room, closed the door, and leaned my back against it. The silence inside was different now. It was no longer the silence of those waiting for help. It was the silence of someone who sets up the chess. Oliver entered shortly after, brought 2 small cameras, one portable and the other with magnetic attachment. We installed one in the corner of the bookcase and another near the window, facing the table. I had a plan. Not a cruel revenge plan, the kind we see on film. No. What I wanted was cooler than that. Cleaner. I wanted him to see me, that he would listen to me, and that everything would be recorded. Because sometimes, the greatest punishment is not jail. It is the weight of one's own conscience when it is forced to see itself in the mirror. I took my black folder. Inside were the papers of my will, the most recent, the one that made it clear Mason was out. Everything, workshops, goods, savings, property, would be directed to a veterans institution and a mechanical training project for young people without families. A dream that Sarah and I used to talk about back then, when Mason was still a boy who liked to disassemble clocks in the living room. I called my lawyer, Mark Tuttle, in Seattle. I confirmed that the documents were ready to be registered the next morning. "Are you sure about that, Will?" he asked with that tone of someone who has known me for years. "More than ever, Mark. And if everything goes as I hope, soon I will have the proof I needed to close this with honor." "Record everything," he said. "Record calmly, and don't say more than necessary." "I know." I organized the bedroom table. I placed the papers neatly aligned, next to a copy of the workshop deed. I took my favorite pen and left it there. On top, a sheet with only one handwritten phrase. "There is still time to be a man." I sat in the chair and waited. Time passed slowly. The clock seemed to mock my calm. I looked at the door like a fisherman looks at the river, knowing that the fish will come back. Mason went up shortly after 6. I heard the sound of boots, the creaking of the railing. He stopped in front of the door. His hesitation was visible even on the other side of the wood. Maybe he felt something strange in the air. Perhaps for the first time he had doubts. And then, it crashed. 3 dry touches. I opened it calmly, and when he saw me, he stopped. His eyes wide, his mouth half open. "Dad?" he said, almost in a whisper. "Surprised?" I asked, my voice firm, without raising my tone. "You seemed so sure that we wouldn't see each other again." He looked at the room, saw the table set up, the discreet cameras, the papers. What is that?" "It's the end of a cycle, Mason. But before you say anything, I want you to sit down and listen. All of this is being recorded, and it's good that it is." He hesitated. Then he entered slowly, looking around like a cornered animal. Sat. His hands were sweating. His face, once so confident, was now pale. You survived," he said, still in shock. "Yes. The forest was no match for me. And you, Mason, you finally showed who you really are." He tried to stammer some justification. He began to say that it was a mistake, that it was just a scare, that I didn't want anything serious to happen. But I raised my hand. "Don't talk like you're a child. You knew what you were doing. You left me there without food, without a weapon, 30 miles from civilization. You lied to the guard, you lied to me, and he almost succeeded. But you know what you didn't expect?" He was silent. "You didn't expect that I still knew how to fight." I got up, went to the table, took the papers and put them in front of him. "This is my New Testament. From tomorrow, none of this will be yours anymore. You will leave my life as you left the forest, behind your back, without honor." He swallowed. "Dad, please. You left me for dead, Mason. And now, you're going to have to live with it. The difference is that I don't want his death. I want you to live. Live to remember. Live to understand. And who knows, maybe one day, to repent." Mason began to cry, but I didn't cry with him, because at that moment my heart was at peace and I knew the worst was over. Now it was time to let justice do its job. And what would happen the next day? It would seal the fate of everything I built, and everything he lost. The truth, when told at the right time, does not need to be shouted. And in that motel room, muffled by the smell of old wood and cold coffee, I saw in my son's eyes that he didn't expect to find me alive, much less sitting, calm, with the documents open as if he was waiting for a formal visit. Mason entered with stiff shoulders but wobbly hands. He closed the door behind him and stood still, like someone who witnesses a ghost. "Father," murmured. I just pointed to the chair in front of the table. He obeyed. He sat down slowly, as if his knees no longer had strength. The room was quiet, but outside, Oliver monitored everything on camera. Every word would be kept. And that, for me, was enough. I spent a few seconds watching that face that one day I cradled in my arms. He had dark circles under his eyes. Sweat? Repentance? No, not yet. What I saw was fear. Fear that the plan failed. Fear that the money would not come. Fear of facing a father he thought was weak, and found it whole. "You thought of everything, didn't you?" I began without raising my tone. "The tickets, the new equipment, even the model of the rental car which could be mistaken for any other in the parking lot of the park." Mason opened his mouth, but I raised my hand. "No. Now you're going to listen." He was silent. Eyes ran across the table. They saw the will. They saw the paper with the phrase I left. "There's still time to be a man." The silence became heavy. "You lied about your friends." He said that they canceled the trip at the last minute. Lie. There were never any friends. You bought the equipment the day before. They still had the tags on. He lied about the time, about the trail, about the route. He chose the most remote place on purpose. He feigned excitement. He feigned affection. But what didn't you pretend, Mason? It was the relief he felt when he left me for dead. He lowered his head. He took a deep breath. He tried to restrain his trembling hands. I was confused, Dad. It was just a test, a way for you to see what it's like to depend. Depend? I cut off. You received everything without ever having asked for it, and yet hates me inside. You didn't want me to learn anything, Mason. You wanted me to disappear. Is that it? You saw me as an obstacle. At this point, his voice failed. It's not like that. You don't understand the pressure, the years, the comparisons. Always the hero, the perfect father, the workshop, Sarah. When he said his mother's name, I felt a lump going up my throat, but I held on. You tried to kill me for money and failed. The phrase fell like a stone. He closed his eyes, as if he wanted to erase everything. But there was no turning back. As of tomorrow, you are out of my life legally. These papers are ready to be registered. You will no longer use my name to achieve anything. And what you did is all recorded, everything. He raised his eyes, now full of water. Are you going to report me? No, I replied calmly. Because jail is not enough for those who have no heart. You will live. He will wake up every day remembering that he was not smart enough to bury his own father. You will look in the mirror and see a broken man alone, poor, and, the worst, without honor. If this piece of my life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will it help me to carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think, because there are things that, when we talk, are not just for us. It's for those who have been through or are going through something similar. Mason stood up, slowly. His shoulders were already slumped. His face was wet without scandalous tears, but with that silent shame of someone who knows he has lost everything. He opened the bedroom door, turned to me once again. Dad, I'm sorry. I just stared at him. I didn't say yes. I didn't even say no. Because forgiveness comes with time. Or it doesn't. And as he walked down the stairs steadily, I knew that chapter of our story was sealed. But what I didn't know yet is that Mason wasn't the only one who had plans, and that something even bigger was about to happen. He came back later that afternoon, after spending hours walking around the small town, maybe trying to figure out where he had gone wrong, maybe trying to come up with some excuse that might still work. When he entered the room, he didn't look me in the eye. He sat down, tired, dirty from the dust of the road, and asked me for water. I served without saying a word. It was funny. After all, he still expected me to take care of him. I placed the glass on the table next to the black paste, and calmly I opened the lid. I took out the new will, signed, stamped, printed on letterhead with Washington's seal. I stretched out my arm and handed it into his hands. Read. He hesitated but took it. He began to look over the lines, at first with suspicion, then with astonishment, and finally with an expression that I had never seen on my son's face, incredulity. What? What is this? He asked, his voice already trembling. It's my testament, Mason. Updated 6 weeks ago, before the trip, before you left me in that desert. He read it again, his eyes running fast, desperate, as if looking for a loophole, a mistake, some part where he was still included. But there wasn't. Did you donate everything? He asked, breathless. Everything. The workshops, the house where you grew up, the fund your mother left, the stocks. It all now belongs to a foundation for orphans of veterans, the community hospital and a technical school in his mother's name. Nothing else is yours. He dropped the paper in his lap. His face was white. His eyes were wet. But it was not genuine sadness. It was frustration. It was anger mixed with humiliation. Why? He asked in a whisper. Because even before you tried to kill me, you were no longer part of my life. I watched you, day after day, treat me like a bank, like a weight. You didn't ask how I was. You avoided me. He only called me when he needed something. And that's when I understood. I was no longer his father. I was just a resource. He tried to babble something. He said he was confused, that life had put too much pressure on him, that he always felt in the shadow of my story with Sarah. You were always the example, the man she loved, the strong, the perfect. And I was just the spoiled son that no one respected. You have become this, Mason. No one forced you. I gave you everything, and I asked you little to be a man of character. But you chose another path. The silence became dense, cutting. He lowered his head. Don't you love me anymore? I took a deep breath. Love, my son, it does not die like that. But respect. This one, you threw away with your bare hands. I could see at that moment, at that very moment, that he was crumbling inside. But it wasn't the kind of pain that heals. It was the kind of pain that corrodes because it is born of the awareness that everything has been lost, not by accident, but by one's own decision. And if there's one thing I've learned in this long life I've lived, it's that we don't lose someone all at once. We lose little by little. A gesture of coldness here, a selfish choice there. And when you see it, there is no one left on the other side of the table. If you're here with me listening to this part of my story, and at some point you felt this tightness in your chest, for someone you lost in life, for a bond that was slowly breaking, leave me a comment here. He says to me, I understand. I know how it is. Or just, it's true. Because even in silence we find ourselves in pain. And I feel that a lot of people still need to see themselves in this story so as not to repeat the same paths. Mason stood there silent, his hands sweating over the papers. I tried to imagine what was going through his head. Maybe he was going back in time, remembering every time he called me outdated, useless, old. Maybe he remembered the nights when I closed the workshop alone while he went out to parties paid for with the money I sent. Maybe he thought about the last time he really hugged me, if I could remember. But me, I only thought about tomorrow, what it would be like to wake up free. No fear, no weight, no rope cutting my chest that was the disappointment with my own son. But the story, it wasn't over yet, because what did Mason do after he left that room? It was something that even I didn't expect, and that would change everything once again. He stayed there in the room for a while longer, holding the papers with trembling fingers until he suddenly got up and began to walk from one side to the other, like a trapped animal. His breathing became heavier, his face red. It was as if everything was boiling inside his chest and could no longer fit. I just kept watching, quiet, and then it exploded. Do you want to know why I did that? He shouted, his eyes wide and his hands flattened, trembling. Because you raised me weak. He spoiled me as if this were love. He never really gave me space, never trusted me with anything worthwhile. He was always William's hero of his mother, the perfect mechanic, the man who came back from the war intact, the exemplary father. He came up on the table, spitting every word with old hatred. You shove money down my throat like that's going to create someone. You bought my loyalty with pocket money, with travel, with a new car. But he never taught me to walk alone. And then, when I grew up, you looked at me as if I was your mistake. I sat down. He said nothing. Silence is a weapon that only those who have been beaten a lot know how to use. Mason snorted. It went in circles. And suddenly, it was as if the floor of his soul had cracked. I planned, yes, he said without thinking. Of course I planned. Do you think that was chance, the trail, the place without signal, the bear? I spent weeks researching that. I read reports, saw maps, did route simulation. I chose that place because I knew that no one passed by, that no one was going to find you, that the chances of survival were almost zero. You would die, and I would come back with a sad story. I would tell the police that you got lost, that we tried to find each other, that you were weak, that age had beaten you. His voice was no longer that of someone in a panic. It was someone confessing, because he believed deep down that there was still forgiveness, which perhaps admitting was the way back. But he didn't know that, on the other side of the wall, Oliver recorded everything, every sentence, every detail. The backpack with food, I hid it. The GPS, I changed the batteries. The weather forecast, I lied. When you slept, I sat looking at you and thought, it's today, it's over. And I left. He stopped. He looked at me. For the first time, he seemed truly embarrassed. But when I drove away, something squeezed me in here. He beat his chest. Something I couldn't understand. And when I went back to the parking lot and saw that you weren't there, that there was no more signal, I panicked. I thought it had worked too well. And then I was afraid. Afraid of what? I asked. To live with it? Or not receiving the money? He did not answer. He just sat down. And he cried. Pause. No. There are memories that we carry like tattoos on our souls. They don't hurt every day, but when they do, donate funds. That moment when my son confessed everything, with a choked voice, without understanding that he was digging his own hole, will accompany me until the end. Because it wasn't just a crime, it was a betrayal of blood. If you've ever experienced something that was marked like this, even if it was otherwise, let me know in the comments. Open this chest of memories with me. It just says, I've felt it, or I have a mark like this. Sometimes sharing the pain helps to carry it. I waited for him to finish. I didn't get up. I didn't hit the table. I didn't call anyone. I just said, thank you for telling me the truth. He looked confused. Is that all? For now. Because what he didn't know is that the truth does not set you free when it comes too late. It only confirms what the silence was already screaming. And there, on that freezing night, his fate was sealed. Because there was another revelation about to happen, one that neither he nor I expected, and that would change everything. Again, after his confession fell to the floor of the room like a body without a soul, I stood up. No rush, without anger. It was as if something inside me had settled down, as if the truth I'd always felt but never wanted to admit had finally taken off. I went to the small table next to the bed and took out my cell phone. Mason looked at me, still with his face wet, his eyes red, his shirt stained with sweat. Dad, what are you going to do? I stared at him for a moment, just as firmly as when I first taught him how to ride a bike. And I replied, now yes, it's time to call the authorities. I dialed the Alaska State Police directly. I introduced myself calmly, full name, exact location, and said, I need to register a case of attempted murder. The victim is me. The author is by my side. There was silence on the line, followed by clear instructions. They asked me not to leave the place, that there would be no physical confrontation, and that a team would be sent immediately. Mason turned pale. Dad, no. I said that in the heat of the moment. I didn't want to. Yes, I cut off. I wanted it with all the letters. You researched, planned, rehearsed. You didn't get lost. You lost me on purpose. It didn't take long. Less than an hour later, a state police pickup truck parked in front of the motel. Lights on, 2 support vehicles close behind. The receptionist didn't even blink. Oliver, already warned, left the next room with the USB stick in his hands, recordings in backup. When the door opened and Detective Sarah Martinez entered, I felt for the first time a different kind of relief. The relief of justice coming slowly, with boots soiled with ice and eyes that do not tremble. She was young, but with a tough, experienced countenance. He looked at me, then at Mason. William Harper? He asked. I nodded. Are you okay? Physically, yes. Emotionally, only God knows. She nodded. Let's listen first to what was recorded. The 3 of us sat down. Oliver turned over the files. She put on her headphones, pressed play, and listened. Her face didn't move, but her left hand, which held the clipboard, squeezed the metal tightly. When he finished, he took off his headphones and stared at Mason. Your full name? He asked. Mason Harper. You are being arrested for attempted murder. The content of the recording shows premeditation, execution details, and spontaneous confession. You have the right to remain silent. Mason jumped to his feet. No, that's not fair. I am his son. It was just an outburst. She continued coldly. Whatever you say can and will be used against you in court. 2 officers entered. They handcuffed him right there, at the door of the room. I sat down. I just looked. What I felt the most at that moment, it wasn't anger. It was a strange kind of cold sadness, as if I had buried my son in life. Dad, please. He says it was a misunderstanding. Say I was just nervous. I didn't answer. Because the truth once told, it doesn't go back to the drawer anymore. The detective came up to me and said, We're going to need your formal statement tomorrow morning, Mr. Harper. We can escort you to the police station or arrange for an officer to come here. I'll go there, I replied. I want to finish this on my own 2 feet. I see. And, sir, I'm sorry. Me too, detective. More than you think. Mason was taken, head down, hands tied, and I stood there watching the snow start to fall outside, as if the world was slowly trying to clean up the dirt from everything that happened. But as I watched that silent street, a question began to form inside me, because despite everything being resolved, there was something that still didn't make sense, something I would only realize days later, something that would change the course of this story again, in a way that neither the police nor my heart were prepared for. The next morning I was escorted to the Anchorage police station. The road was long and the cold still cut like a knife, but inside I was firm. I felt the weight of responsibility on my shoulders, but also that clarity that only comes when we know we did the right thing, even if that right hurts. Upon arriving, I was greeted by an officer named Bennett, a serious, straightforward man, who led me into a room with gray walls and a wooden table marked by years of stories. I sat down, adjusted my coat, and started counting, in the most honest way I could, from Mason's first strange look that morning of the trip, to the moment he confessed everything in that motel room. Every detail, every choice, every pain. I spoke as if I were cleansing the soul. Oliver arrived soon after, with the recordings already saved in 3 different formats. He handed over the files and signed the papers as a witness. The county prosecutor, a slow-spoken gentleman named Rickard, came into the room, shook my hand tightly and said, "Mr. Harper, in more than 20 years of career, I have seldom seen a case so clear, so meticulously documented. You acted with a dignity that, frankly, is rare even among our best." I thanked him, not knowing much what to say. I didn't want to clap. I just wanted the truth to stand. Meanwhile, Mason had already been booked. They took their fingerprints, photographed them, registered them as attempted murder with premeditation. He was placed in a common cell with 3 other men, and when I saw him through the crack in the door, sitting on the floor, leaning against the cold wall with his head between his knees, I hardly recognized him. Without that arrogant look, without the confident walk, without the always calculated tone, he was just a lost boy, a broken man inside, but a man who made choices. And now he faced the consequences. Detective Martinez accompanied me to the exit. Before getting in the car, she touched my shoulder and said, "It's going to be tough. Media, questions, judgments, but the Lord did what he had to do." Agreed. I know, and I would do it again. And there, with my feet in the snow and the weak sun illuminating the morning, I realized that justice is not revenge. Justice is when the world returns to its axis, even if we still feel it spinning with pain. But that same night, I received an unexpected call, an unknown number, a female voice, hesitant, on the other end of the line. And what she told me opened a wound that I didn't even know existed, because the story with Mason, he still kept a secret. And this secret came from long before that forest. I returned to the motel with heavy feet, but a little lighter soul. I didn't exchange a word with anyone on the way. The driver of the police car was a young man, polite, but he felt in his eyes that he already knew everything. Maybe because of the expression on my face. Perhaps because the city was small, and stories like this run like wind between the mountains. When I entered the room, I closed the door slowly and leaned my forehead against the wood. I was like that for a while, breathing. The silence of the room embraced me in a way I hadn't felt in a long time. It was no longer the silence of doubt, humiliation, impotence. It was another, a silence of a new beginning. I went to the bathroom. I turned on the hot water. I let it run all over my body. This wasn't just a shower. It was a kind of farewell of everything I carried on my shoulders for almost 3 decades. The guilt, the fear of losing, the desperate desire to be enough for 2. When I left, I looked at myself in the mirror. The stubble, the sunken eyes, the hair already almost all white, but there was firmness in my reflection. That man over there, he was at peace. I sat in the armchair by the window. The snow was still falling, thin, discreet. I took my old notebook. The leather cover is already worn out, the pages yellowed, and I started writing. It was not a letter to Mason. It wasn't for justice nor for Sarah, my eternal companion. It was for me, for that William who got lost trying to compensate for the absence of a mother with the double presence of a father. I wrote, "You didn't make a mistake by loving too much, But he was wrong to think that love is saying yes to everything, that to protect is to be silent, that donating is the same thing as teaching. I wrote calmly, line by line, as if sewing together every piece of what I had broken inside. I talked about the nights I spent awake waiting for him to arrive, even as an adult, of the times I saw in his eyes the contempt disguised as boredom, dinners when he didn't take his eyes off his cell phone, the tightness I felt every time he said whatever in a cold voice. And I also talked about myself, of my cowardice in not confronting, to pretend that it was just a phase, in using money as a bridge, when in fact, I was building a wall. And there, in that chair, with the pen trembling between my fingers, I wrote the sentence that hurt the most to come out. I let my son believe that he could do anything, even kill me. But even with all that, there was no hatred in what I wrote, nor desire for revenge. What I wanted, at that moment, was to ensure that this did not become another story thrown to the wind. I wanted someone, in some corner, to hear this and say, I'm not going to make the same mistake. Maybe you, who are there on the other side, listening to me until now, are that person. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. So enjoy this video and sign up, and let's make this story reach those who need it. Not by me, but for everyone who is fighting in silence not to lose those they love, or not to get lost trying to save others. I closed the notebook, took a deep breath and stood there looking at the world outside. Not a word more. No plan to follow. Just me, my conscience, and an old telephone on top of the dresser that morning, would ring again. Because the past, I still had one more surprise in store. And that voice, I would change everything again. I returned to Seattle a few days later, with my body tired, but my mind decided. The city received me with that usual cloudy sky, but I could no longer see the same streets nor the same workshop. What was once the center of my life was now just the setting for an old chapter. The next day, I went straight to the registry office. The will that had already been signed was finally registered. No turning back, no loopholes. Every structure I've built with decades of sweat, every hydraulic lift, every wheel wrench, every penny, now it was directed to a cause that made sense. I turned Harper Motors into something bigger, a foundation of technical training for fatherless, orphaned young people of the kind you don't see, those who have living but absent, cold, or lost parents. The paperwork took days, but I was there, at every meeting with steady eyes and a quiet heart. The first wing of the foundation was named after Sarah Harper School Workshop. It was the least I could do for this woman who taught me the true meaning of presence. When they finished installing the sign on the facade, I moved away a little and looked from afar. At that moment I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Belonging. I was no longer just a wounded father. I was someone who could still teach, not with sweet words but with tools, open engines, and sharp truths. A few months later I received an invitation to give a lecture at a meeting of parents and educators. Hesitated. I was never a stage man. I always preferred the sound of the engine to the sound of the microphone. But I accepted. I went up there with the same coat I wore in Alaska, without a script, without a rehearsal. I spoke of love that turns into fear, of the protection that becomes prison, and the silence that sometimes educates more than 1,000 speeches. I did not mention names. I didn't expose anyone, but I told everything. And in the end, he said a phrase that came out without me thinking too much, but that marked everyone there. Don't wait to be abandoned in the middle of the forest, to realize that you created a stranger inside the house. After that, I was called to other meetings, community programs, technical schools. I never charged a penny, because that wasn't about me. It was about a bunch of Williams and Masons scattered around, hurting each other in the dark of good intentions. And look, if you've come this far in this story, know, there's still something strong to come, because the most striking part, the deepest wound, was yet to happen, and it was on a Sunday afternoon, when I least expected it. I was at home, sitting on the porch, reading an old newspaper. The sun was lightly hitting the wooden slats. The foundation had already been operating for 3 weeks. The boys showed up every day with the desire to learn, to grow, to change, and I felt that for the first time in a long time, my life had found its way again. But that's when life likes to turn the page without warning. The landline phone rang inside the house, and I answered without thinking. On the other side, a feminine voice, young but firm. "Mr. Harper?" "Himself," I replied. "My name is Emily. I'm an intern in Detective Sarah Martinez's office. I hope you're well." "As far as possible, yes. What can I help with?" She took a deep breath. "I'm not caring about your son's lawsuit." "Right. Is already with the prosecutor." "So?" "It's about information that came to us, a letter, anonymous, sent by mail to the police station." "Letter?" "Yes. Containing things you need to see for yourself." "What kind of things?" There was a pause. And then she said, "Things that can change the way you see this whole story." And at that moment, I knew that the past I hadn't finished with me yet, and that the wound that I thought I had already closed, it was about to be reopened. The letter arrived on a gray morning, as if time itself wanted to warn me that there was weight inside. It was a thick envelope, yellowed on the edges, with the seal of the state penitentiary stamped on the corner. I recognized the handwriting right away. It was Mason's, 5 handwritten pages neatly lined up, as if he were trying hard to seem sincere even in the stroke. I sat on the chair on the balcony, the same one where I liked to see the young people from the foundation arriving early, laughing, dirty with grease and full of life. I opened the letter slowly without expectation, but with that twinge in my chest that only a father feels. The first sentence came with weight. "Dad, I know I don't deserve the right to call you that." And from then on it was a parade of carefully chosen words, as if regret fit into vocabulary. He spoke of the cell, the smell of prison, the longing for life before. He said that his mind was dark that day in the forest, that he acted on impulse, that he was seized by a mixture of anger and despair. He mentioned the past, the death of his mother, the weight of being raised by someone so strong that it seemed unattainable. He tried to convince me that part of the blame was also mine, for never letting him make a mistake, for always having solved everything for him. "You spoiled me until I became weak and then hated me for not being strong like you." This sentence made me stop. I closed my eyes. I took a deep breath, not because of the pain, but by the trap. He asked for forgiveness, not with the humility of those who repent, but with the calculation of those who still seek to recover what they have lost. And there, on the penultimate page, came the clear request, disguised as a plea. "I know you took my name out of the will, but if one day your heart softens, think of me not as a criminal, but as the son who still wants a chance." It ended with a love, Mason. I folded the letter calmly. I took him to the living room. I turned on the shredder. I saw the paper disappear in thin strips, as if each piece took away the last vestige of doubt. I didn't cry. I didn't even curse. I felt sorry. But a pity is not an invitation. Panna does not rebuild a bridge that was burned with gasoline and phosphorus. I couldn't, and didn't want to, remake a noose that died in that forest. Because forgiveness, when it is true, comes first with silence transformed into action. And all I saw there was strategy. Cold, calculated, as always. That night I sat down to write another page in my notebook, and I wrote like this: "Not every request for forgiveness is redemption. Sometimes it's just fear of being left with nothing." I closed the notebook firmly. I looked out the window, and I saw that life went on outside. The foundation growing, the boys learning, Sarah's legacy breathing. But the next day, when I arrived to open the shed, something was different. There was a figure waiting for me leaning against the fence, and what she told me, there on the sidewalk, was going to force me to revisit a piece of the past that I thought I had already buried. Who was she? And why did he use the surname Harper? It was mildly cold that morning in Seattle, but the kind of cold that doesn't hurt. It just invites silence. The sky was cloudy as always, but inside me everything was different. I was no longer the man who trembled at the loss, nor the father who carried the guilt as if it were part of the body. There, standing in front of the door of my own house with my backpack on my back and my rifle safe as in the old days of the Navy, I knew exactly where I was going. And more than that, I knew why. It was not an escape. It was a return. And this time, there was no one to betray me on the way. I traveled light, only the essentials. A few supplies, a map, the compass Sarah gave me before she passed away. It still works, you know. And the letter from a boy from the foundation, named Eli. He had written, "Mr. Harper, I have no father, but when I listen to their stories, it feels like I do." I read that letter about 10 times on the plane, and each time I read it, my heart pushed a little further away any trace of hurt that still remained. It was as if, instead of a son who tried to put me out, I had gained dozens who were learning to turn on their own light. I got off at Fairbanks Airport. It was my first return to Alaska after all. The smells came back first. Damp wood, pine, the sharp air that seems to want to go straight into the bone. I rented a Jeep. I drove slowly, without haste. Every turn reminded me that I survived. Each tree, a mute witness of what should have been my end. But I wasn't there to reopen wounds. I was there to leave flowers where they wanted to bury my name. I chose another stretch of Denali National Park, a taller one, with less risk and more beauty. I got close to dusk, set up my tent calmly. I made a fire, sat, and for a few minutes, I just listened. The wind among the leaves, the creaking of the trees, a lone crow overhead. That was not loneliness. It was a meeting, with myself, with the life that was left, with the man I became after everything burned inside. On the second night, I took some pictures. I sent it to the people at the foundation. The boys always ask if it's true that I faced a bear, and I always say, I faced something worse, and walked on 2 legs. Then I read more letters. Several. Each one with a crooked handwriting, a hard story, a sentence that hurt and healed at the same time. There in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by all that was simple and strong, I realized something that changed everything about me. True loneliness does not come from being alone. It comes from having no purpose. And I, now, had one. I closed my eyes under the starry sky. I remembered Sarah, her calm way of looking at me when I lost myself in excess. I remembered the first day I took Mason in my arms, and even his first laughs in the workshop, when he was just a curious boy. The memories didn't hurt anymore. They were like old leaves in a book that we don't reread out of sadness, but out of respect. On the last day, I walked to a plateau where I could see almost the entire valley. I stayed there, firm, in no hurry to return, and at that moment something inside me whispered, "You're back in one piece, William." And it was in this absolute silence that I heard footsteps behind me, low, cautious, and a familiar, hesitant, wind-broken voice said, "Father, is that really you? What was Mason doing there? How did you know I would be returning to that place? And above all, why did you come?" It was him, Mason, thin, with his face half covered by his hood, the sunken eyes of someone who does not sleep with his conscience. He stood there among the trees as if waiting for the wind to hide him. I didn't take a step. I didn't ask a question. He said only, "I came because I wanted to understand why you don't hate me." I took a deep breath. I looked at the sky and then at him, and I said, "Because what you tried to take away from me, you ended up giving it to me." He frowned, confused. "You gave me back to myself, Mason, when you left me there, to die. It was at that very moment that I came back to life, and then I turned my back, not angry, but with peace, because there was everything I needed to understand." Mason stood there. He didn't ask for anything else. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. And I didn't look back either. I descended that plateau with my shoulders lighter than ever. Today, with 59 years on my back, I can say that I started to live for real at 58. The exact second I heard the tires disappearing in the Alaskan mud. I died that day, but it was in that symbolic death that I ceased to exist as the guilty father, the absent man, the desperate provider for affection, and I started to be William Harper, whole man, not perfect, but whole. And you know, the biggest lesson I carry is not about survival in the forest. It's about survival within the soul, about how we can get lost, trying to hold on to someone who has been loose for a long time. To love is not to carry it on your lap. Sometimes to love is to let go and hope that life teaches us what we have not been able to do. And when she doesn't teach, we learn to follow anyway. My legacy is now different. It is to see the eyes of each young person who enters that foundation afraid of the world and leaves with a profession, a purpose. It's knowing that Sarah's name lives on, not in cemetery marble, but in the uniform of every boy who now has a direction. I understood that blood is not everything, which family can be chosen, and that sometimes the strongest bonds are born precisely from the pain that we thought we couldn't handle. If you've made it this far, thank you very much. from the heart. Telling this story was not easy, but if it served to open a space of silence inside, a place of reflection or even healing, so every word was worth it. Help me take this story further? Enjoy this video. This is like a tight hug that warms the heart of the person who told it. And if you want to come back here another day for another coffee, another memory, subscribe to the channel. This house is yours too. Comment below which city you are watching. I like to wonder where my words are going. And it activates the bell, okay? That way you don't lose when the coffee is brewed again. Now, if you're still here with me, don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each wrinkle tells a story, and each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.